Hey everybody, it's Mike here. I'm here with my friend Nicholas, and he's graciously agreed to sit down with me to talk about the novels that I've written, the Pearlsong Refounding, Gideon's Dawn, Waymaker, The Song That Shatters, and The Word That Prevails. He's one of the few in these early days who has actually read all four of the novels. And so I have not exactly strong armed him, but I did ask, like, would you mind sitting down with me on video just to talk a little bit about the process of writing these books and to talk about his experience too of what it's like to read them and give people kind of a taste for the story, taste for the characters, taste for any questions that we may come up as we talk about it. We have agreed that for the at least the first part of this, we'll keep it spoiler free, maybe for the first 10, 15 minutes. And then we will hopefully remember to give you a warning before we start talking about anything that's really spoilery in case you haven't read the books yet. So, or you haven't read the later books. But once we get into spoilers, we're going to talk about all of it. So, that's it. But anyway, Nicholas, thank you very much for being here. It's great to have you.
Oh man, so honored. I appreciate it. I love that I got to be on the inside, being able to read through the books before most people, and it was a great, amazing experience. So I'm happy to be able to have this conversation.
That's good. Yeah, Nicholas was one of my ARC readers, my advanced reader copy readers. In fact, one of the very first ones. And it was very heartwarming for me because you kept on like, when can I get the next book? When can I get the next book? And then sending me texts the whole time you're reading it, like, oh man, chapter 32. And then I would have to go look like, what's in chapter 32? I don't remember. So to go figure out what's happening
Yeah.
where you are in the story. But anyway, Nicholas has we've thrown together some questions to get things started, and we'll just kind of see where the conversation goes. But so Nicholas, take it away, and then we'll just see where things fly.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to start more around the writer and the writing of it before we really get into some of the specifics and nuts and bolts of the story itself. So why don't we start with this question? How did you decide to start writing?
Well, that's a great question. I fell in love with writing really as a kid. Like I started uh, getting fascinated by words really early on when I was just a boy, fascinated by stories that I would hear in school mostly. My home didn't have a whole lot of books, but I did hear stories in school and learned about books there. And then right around, I'd say my in the sixth grade, so I was about 12 years old, I guess, actually started writing what I thought was the great American novel. Thought I must go ahead and start doing it now. So I started playing around with writing stories about fanciful characters on and at that was a space drama. So I started to write about space dramas and got really into just the idea of story crafting. And it was just a few years later that Star Wars came out. And so when Star Wars hit, I mean, I was so fortunate to be alive and at that age, like turning right around 14 or so, when that hit the theaters. And it was just a worldwide phenomenon. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of that time frame, but there were just lines of people going around blocks in all the major cities waiting overnight just to go in and see this movie, and it just captured my imagination, it captured the whole world's imagination. And so I got those books came out very shortly after the movie came out. So I really started reading in earnest then. And I just thought, this is so magical that I can read this something that somebody else wrote and we can have this shared experience together. Even as a kid, that was just a kind of magic to me. So I was drawn to that, drawn to the magical stories that were being written, and started even journaling a little bit. I didn't call it that, but just started keeping notes about my thoughts right from that point forward. So started very early for me.
Love it. I love it. As you've walked this journey out of becoming a writer, Obviously, you know, you have this series. What I'm curious, what's been the most challenging aspect of writing for you?
It's always been sitting down to write. It's always been time. I probably I share this with a lot of other people, but the world that I grew up in and that I live in now even is not very conducive to the kind of mind space and heart space that's required to actually pour your heart out on the page. And so, like, the hardest part for me in writing is that writing is actually the end result of a lot of work that your thought work or thought play that you're doing on your own. And whether that's dreaming, whether that's reading, whether it's just spending time in silence or out in nature. There's just so much that goes into the prep before writing. So the hardest part for me has been the actual getting my butt in the seat and capturing stuff on the page. Uh, but tied to that is all the stuff you need that I need to do ahead of that, which is like even the last couple of days, I've been spending the last 3 days just reading really good stuff, meditating on it, writing some notes on it, and not knowing quite where that's going to go. And but knowing that that's essential to the process of whatever it is that I'm going to be writing next. So that's always been the hard part for me because I have lots of other pressures, I think like most people do, to do other things, to do things that feel more practical, to feel more like they're productive
Yeah.
than that work.
So in that same vein, I'm curious because you're talking about a lot of the heart behind it. What are your thoughts around the importance of storytelling?
Oh man. With our stories, we make the world. That's I can't remember who said that quote, but it's a very true quote. We are we're a story making species, and we craft stories just same way we breathe. Some of them happen automatically, and some of them happen on purpose, but we make sense of the world by crafting stories. And so, like, the most powerful storytellers of every age are, to my mind, the ones who actually shape the dominant narratives of our time. I mean, I mentioned Star Wars as an example, and even though
Yeah.
that's a fanciful space fantasy, it still rekindled a sense of wonder, awe, possibility and heroism within my generation at a time when it was desperately needed. That was
Yeah.
during the time when we first started to learn, my generation first started to learn that our authority structures were not as trustworthy as we thought, that our institutions were more corrupt than we believed they were. We couldn't always trust that our leaders would do the right thing. And we needed to have some sense of a restoration of hope and of our agency. And story is what did that. So, so I believe that storytelling is actually one of the most, if not the most powerful art, most powerful gift, and most dangerous skill
Yeah.
within the human society. And the one with the best story wins typically. And so the great storytellers of our time, the great um, good-hearted storytellers of our time are a gift to us all. And I really wanted for like these books to be a gift like that, to be a gift of hope and a gift of restoration of possibility and of redemption for people. Uh, Hopefully along the same lines, certainly not to the degree of Star Wars, but along the same lines of
Hopefully, you know.
yeah, hopefully right. Instilling in people that sense of their own possibility for goodness and for beauty in the world.
It's a beautiful answer. I love that. So you mentioned just the impact of the storytelling. You mentioned Star Wars and how that was on you. I'm curious what other writers influenced you in a way. I mean, I know this may be two separate questions in the same because we're going to get into, you know, why fantasy and, you know, the series and all of that. I'm curious what the most influential writers were for you and how that led to you creating what you created.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Well, I mean, it really did start probably with Star Wars. It's in terms of connecting me to the fantastical. But when it comes to actual writing, to writers, it has to be Tolkien. Like, because I went pretty much right from Star Wars. I was so hungry for other kinds of stories along those lines. So I went into sci-fi first, but Star Wars is space fantasy. It's kind of a hybrid of the two. So I branched out in both directions. Quickly found Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and that's a crazy beautiful, crazy difficult read for a young man as I was at the time. But I just knew as I was pouring through the pages that I was reading something really potent
Mm.
and powerful, and that it was having an effect on me that I couldn't quite put words to, but I knew I was being impacted by it. And that was my kind of first experience of being exposed to art, to be honest, like just the effect that art has on the human soul. And then from there, Narnia, C.S. Lewis, once I understood who Tolkien's friends were, like went to read Narnia. Then I, read many other, like Robert Jordan's series on the Eye of the World and that whole series. I read Stephen Donaldson in his series, the Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, which it's a portal fantasy like this one, and you can hear echoes of his story or that story in the Pearlsong Refounding as well. Ursula Le Guin, Anne McCaffrey. Like I just started going down the list of these great science fiction and fantasy authors in those days that were really prominent in those days of my teenage years coming into early adulthood, that really did have kind of a deeply formative impact on my sensibilities as a writer and what was possible as a writer. Arthur C. Clarke, from there getting into hard sci-fi, the Foundation series, Isaac Asimov, like all of that. I just kept going into that whole space.
Okay, so that's I love that. So in the just the the multiple impacts that fantasy and sci-fi had on you, talk to me about the impact then transforming into I really want to create this space in something that's uniquely and truly mine that I'm now writing.
That's so wild because I did know I wanted to be a writer. I did not connect the dots between what I was reading and what I wanted to write until I got into university, and I had already written mostly nonfiction, spiritual reflection stuff, devotional material, maybe some stuff that was more theological because that was my faith tradition, and there was a lot of opportunities to write in that tradition. But then one day, when I was kind of minding my own business, doing some of that thought work that I mentioned earlier, this character just popped into my head. Gideon just walked in to my mental space, and it was an accosting moment because, like I mentioned, I wasn't thinking about writing anything fictional, but this fictional character showed up in my imagination, and I was trying to figure out, like, why are you, like, what is this and why are you here? And over the course of a short amount of time, I began to get the sense that this character, Gideon, wanted me to write his story. Uh, and so that's how it started. And then, right about the same time that that was happening, I was studying the book of Proverbs, which is a book in the Old Testament. My faith tradition, is big in that. So I was studying that book, and I was learning about, in that book, it talks a lot about the power of words and how there's this one verse in there, one passage that says the power of life and death are in the tongue, and those who love it eat its fruit. And this is actually quoted in the first book in Gideon's Dawn before the book starts, because that phrase, that just line blew me away. This notion, if that's true, that the power of life and death are in the tongue. Just blew my mind. Like you could kill with your tongue, you can give life
Uh,
with your tongue.
Wild.
Yeah, and so I began to put these two things together and imagine what if there what if there was a world where words could literally kill, or literally give life, and Gideon somehow had an adventure or had a journey to take in that space. And those were the seeds that began the story of Gideon's dawn. So really, I came into writing my own narrative by sort of being confronted with this character and this idea, and then the two coming together and saying, "Yeah, there's something here that you need to write about," you know. And then he just uh, honestly wouldn't leave me alone. So I just so I kept just kept writing stuff about him, and then the story kind of began to unfold from there. And I
Wow.
started writing it in earnest right about the time I graduated, yeah, from university.
Okay. So that's when you start. So obviously the character came before the story. And then as you, I guess I would say, walked with the character, the story began to expand.
Yeah, yeah. I just started to do it on the side. I when I got out of university, I was working in a church at first, and then a few years into that, I got a job at a publishing house. I was trained, like I mentioned, I wanted to be a writer, so I was trained as a writer. So I got a job at a publishing house as an editor. So I had a full-time gig working with words, but my job did not involve working in fiction. So I continued to work on this novel project as a side, just a side hobby, and wrote Gideon's Dawn over a period of that, I guess, a couple of years. Um, and didn't know, I really didn't have a sense at the time of like what I'm going to do with this. I just was like, well, I'm just going to write this story and then see where it goes. Because even though I was in the publishing world, I was in the nonfiction publishing world, so I didn't have those two parts of the publishing world don't usually mix that much. So I didn't have a lot of access to the agents and the editors that work in the fiction realm. Um, but yeah, I got that done in that time, and then I told a fellow editor friend of mine that I was working on this. And at the time, he was freelancing for a publishing house called Barber Publishing, and he asked me to send him the proposal that I had created because I had already begun to send out proposals to various publishing houses for Gideon's Dawn, and I sent it to him thinking he might submit it to his publishing house and maybe I'd get a good word in. Little did I know that he had authority. He was contracted to actually acquire books. So he just accepted it.
Wow.
So so he ended up getting Gideon's Dawn published way before I ever expected to. And then Waymaker got contracted pretty soon after that too. So I kind of found myself getting pulled into this before I even knew exactly what I was doing. I just sort of like was, oh, I've got this book almost finished and a second book now I've been contracted for, and apparently this story is going to happen. So yeah, that's how it got going.
I love it. Okay, so let's use this as a jumping off point to segue kind of into the Pearlsong Refounding. And I'm aware of this just because I'm privy to the information, but I'm sure something our readers might not be aware of is that the first and second book were created before the second two in the series, the
Right.
tetralogy. Would you speak to a little bit about that? Like, so you obviously you created it, got picked up, you were contracted for the second book, wrote that, and then there's actually quite a big gap.
Yes.
What was the reason behind that?
Yeah, it's interesting because you kind of see this unfold in the story a bit as well. So I think there's both a logistical reason, there's a pretty clear logistical reason why it happened, but I now in hindsight think there was also a creative reason why it happened. But for the logistic reason was that I was contracted to do the second book. The first book gets released, I'm starting to work on the second book, and right at that time, My father fell very ill and very quickly declined and then passed away. And then I had to, or chose to, relocate my life back to the town I grew up in order to take care of my mom, who is now in great need of support. And so I became a primary caregiver, and no one in the family knew this would happen, but as soon as my father passed, my mother seriously declined. So that became pretty much not quite a full-time job, but very, very close to that. So I was all I could do for many months, if not a couple of years, actually probably several years, to care for her and then make enough money on the side just to support myself. And I just didn't have any space to do any writing. So the second book had to wait. I still worked on it, but it just was very, very slow. Um, and so that's it kind of just fell to the side to the point that the publishing company that I had contracted with, uh, through no fault of theirs, they were very gracious through the whole experience, but eventually said, "Look, we can't hold on to this contract. We understand you're in a very difficult situation, but we have to move on." And so that we canceled the contract, and I got the rights back for Waymaker. Um, so it was very deflating for me, very hard for me, but at the same time, I was dealing with a family crisis that I didn't feel like I had any other option
Yeah.
around. So that led to the kind of the dream dying. And
Mhm.
I did finish Waymaker eventually, and then I republished both Gideon's Dawn and Waymaker under my own label. Um, but by
This is
that,
in another season
yeah,
of life.
this was like 2 or 3 or 4 years later. Like I'm now still acting as a caregiver for my mom. I'm still trying to make a living, just making ends meet, and then doing this on the side. But the momentum had already been lost. So I was more or less just doing it as a kind of a gift to myself. I didn't really expect the books to be recognized or grow. Um, it felt like the death of a dream, to be honest, to get into that space, to be in that spot. But then I just kept going. Like once those two books were out, I kept working on book three, and then eventually book four. But they were so slow, and it was always on the side, and I wasn't ever sure, is this worth it or not? Because it just felt like life came in and just dropped a bomb on the whole process.
Yeah.
However, what eventually did happen is that I got to a point in life where where I was no longer caregiving my mom. She ended up passing away, and then I moved back to where I was living and got reestablished, got stable, and then thought, okay, now this is the chance for me to actually finish the story. And what I found as I started to work on books three and four, that um, this is where the other reason comes in. I think the creative reason why it took so long is that I'm not sure that I could have written books three and four when I was 24 years old or 25 years old. Like
Yeah.
the way the story unfolds and what happens to the characters and the journey they go on, I think I had to go on quite a journey and grow and change and take some hard knocks in order to be the kind of writer that could actually write these second two books, to be faithful to the characters and to their journey. So in hindsight, it feels like it kind of worked out just the way it needed
Yeah.
to, because I feel much better about the way the story went. I feel like I have the life experience to be able to write what is now written in those books that I don't think I would have if I'd really finished them back when I was in my 20s.
Man, that is fascinating. Okay, so the amount of time from book one to finishing book four, how long of a time frame are we talking about?
It's like 40 years. Yeah,
Man.
ultimately. Yeah. Ends up being about 4 decades, maybe give or take, but right in there. Yeah. And then at
Wow.
the very end, like what I ended up doing over the last couple years when I finally decided now's the time is I sold my house and moved into a van. I became a van lifer and I went off to an island in the Pacific Northwest and to Scotland. So I spent some time in Scotland and then most of the time in an island in the Pacific Northwest. And I just wrote. I just wrote, and so was able to really focus all my energy on just the story and on the characters and on getting the story completed, which just felt amazing after so long of just only being able to give it a little bit of energy, every week or two. So it feels really good to have it finished. Really, really
I can
good.
only imagine. I can only imagine. So 40 years of a life's work of this story that has lived and breathed inside of you, and now you're at the completion of it. How does that feel? Like, what's coming up for you? Like, I mean, I know you must be excited for the world to hear and read the rest of it, to experience it.
Yeah.
But like now to come to the conclusion of it, how does that sit with you?
Well, it's so different than I expected. It's very exciting. What's been so cool about it for me is, and maybe this might start shifting into the spoiler section, but I've been in relationship with these characters for all that time, and they're dear to me. They're real to me. I've had intimate conversations with them as we've been working through the storyline, and now two things have happened that are different, just seismically different. One is that now I'm able to have conversations about these characters and share them with the world and have those conversations with other people so that when I say, fairnet to you, you know who I'm talking about. When I say agile to you, you know who I'm talking about. Like just that idea that I can now talk about these people that have come to mean so much to me. But the other piece of it is that the story itself is now, in a sense, no longer mine. Like it's been
Mm.
mine to steward and to create and to put on paper, and now it's out there. And like I think anyone who does some kind of piece of art like this, they put it out into the world, and now it belongs to the world. And so there's a wonderful, it's a bit bittersweet, but it's mostly wonderful kind of way of letting it go. And just I'm really eager to see the effect the story itself has on the people who get exposed to it and who read it, who experience it for themselves.
I love it. I love it. I mean, I know that I can speak to that personally too. I mean, it had such a profound effect on me, and maybe we'll be able to get into that and talk about that a little bit more. But are you wanting to go into the spoilers?
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, let's do it. So you
Okay.
got your warning. Yeah, this is where we'll go spoilery.
Spoiler when we need like the
Yeah. Meh, meh, meh.
um, I guess we should start at book one. Because we were talking, book one and two both had these huge cliffhangers at the end of them.
Yes,
Um, and to me, book one, yeah,
there
come
they
on.
are. These on Waymaker. Yep.
Book one felt like such an adventure, such a journey. I it was a little bit disorienting stepping into the story, but I would imagine that's how Gideon experienced it. He's just trying to make sense. He has a million questions and then some as to what's going on in this world that he's fitting in. You mentioned having Gideon and then the story expounding around him. I'm curious if there were specific characters that came in book one that just happened to like come out of left field for you. How did they come to exist? What was really, you mentioned writing this in your mid 20s. What were you hoping to achieve? Did you achieve it? Talk a little bit about the character development in the book one.
Yeah. So Gideon he was my guide into the world of Sacrivelis, the world where all this action takes place, where Gideon ends up being transported to. So he's the one that as he meets Donovan, as he meets Simran and all the other characters, or Kira, or Agile, I meet them. And so the process of that for me as a writer, like what I actually did, everybody has their own process, but I have a file for every single character. So like as I would meet somebody like in a scene, I go, "Oh, this is this guy. His name is Donovan." So then I'd hit pause on the writing and then almost like pull Donovan into a side room and just have a long conversation with Donovan in my imagination about who are you, where are you from, what, tell me about yourself, and just get as much data as I can about him and then put all that in a profile. So I have a character profile for Donovan that helps me just get a sense of him at the beginning. And of course, even at that point, I don't really know the full arc that he's going on. I do know some of the initial qualities that are there. But then as he gets to know Gideon and their relationship develops, I also get to know that dynamic. And so all of it, it's exciting for me as a writer because I'm experiencing it almost like a slow motion movie. Like I'm experiencing the same kind of where's this going exactly and how is this going to unfold? I'm definitely a plotter in the sense that I know kind of the major beats of where the story arc is, where the plot's going, but the characters are wild cards always for me. So what they do or don't do can shift or change what happens in any given scene. I don't try to control them as much as I might control some of the circumstances that may be happening around them. So, but
That's
that's
okay.
how,
That's a great detail. Because one of my questions was, did you have the entire arc of the story, or are you? I don't know what the phrase is, pantser. Did it
yeah.
kind of unfold as you wrote it?
Yeah, yeah, definitely more of a plotter by nature, but found myself more of a pantser once I'm actually in the story. I want after I'll try to say this in English. Once I kind of got into the storyline, I realized that I was not exactly drowning, but I was holding a lot and trying to manage it. And again, this was all like I came into this almost by surprise. So I went to study under one of the greats, Robert McKee, who's known as kind of the great architect of story crafting. He wrote a book called Story, is an icon in Hollywood when it comes to script writing. I flew to California. I sat under his teaching for 40
Wow.
hours to to learn about this idea of how do you hold a story as it's unfolding in this context, so I created what he recommended, which is called a step outline, which is literally almost like a storyboard if you were doing a movie, but it's a storyboard that has different lanes for every scene you're in or every action piece you've got or every character depending on the scene, and then throwing the characters into it and seeing what they do, and
Yeah.
then what they do will shift that. But you kind of know you got to sort of get them to this one other place, like you have another touch point that's got to happen, or you think it has to happen. And so that was kind of how it would work is, guys, I think we're going there. And then they would go, nope, we're going over here. And so I'd take a left and head where they went and then try to make my way back to where I believed the story was going to need to go. And so it was a negotiation once I was actually on the page writing the story. But I began with a framework where I knew
Yeah.
where things were going to go. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So book one, I'm curious because it feels, I don't know what else to call it other than it felt like this arduous journey, this adventure that's unfolding in front of us. Were there parts of that story that were like really easy to write? Were there some parts that were actually way more difficult? I know I'm asking you to go back kind of to some specifics of Gideon's
Yeah.
Dawn, but
Yeah, I mean, one scene that was really a stumper for me was the facing. So, like, for those who've read the book, the where Gideon comes into Wordhaven for the first time and he encounters Seer, and they arrange this thing that's called a facing, which is essentially like where she goes into his mind to try to determine whether he is or is not the Lord Ha'avar, which is their sort of prophesied perhaps deliverer, perhaps destroyer of the lands, which he claims not to be or doesn't know anything about it. Uh, but when that happens, they have an encounter in his mind that ends on this cliffhanger where she keeps pushing him, and then he goes, "You asked for it, you got it," and then this thing ends. And I'm writing this, and like, okay, what happened? And I honestly don't know. I did not know what happened. And so I had my first, you could call it my first experience of writer's block. So I did not know where to go from there because I didn't know what happened in that scene. And it took several, almost like a week or two for me to get to where I could write something, where I could write something else, just kind of move the plot forward. And when you see him later in the story, when he's walking down a hallway and he sees Seer, who's now nearly dead, um, I did not know what was going to happen. So like, it's like I'm
Okay.
writing the story. I see that he sees her. I see that he goes into the room. And then when she reaches out and grabs his hand, I'm just as on the edge of my seat as everybody else because I have no idea what's about to occur. And so like that made that whole exchange was really difficult for me to write because I was very much in the dark. I did not know what was unfolding between these characters because it was so hidden, even from me, until they got in the scene. And then I knew what was unfolding until they got back into Gideon's mind. So there was some things like that that happened that were really hard for me to write because I didn't have all the information. And I think it just goes, I've read about other writers who do, they write on I guess faith is the word you'd use, but they trust the process and they write from a place of trusting the muse that they're going somewhere meaningful. And it has always worked out that way. But that was tough for sure. Um, yeah,
Well, and that's really wild for me to hear, just to have greater context as a reader, because that particular exact moment you're referring to felt like the most vulnerable and pivotal moment of book one.
yes, it is. Yeah, when Gideon finally sees the truth of what he experienced, I did know that was supposed to happen. I just didn't know that was how it was going to happen. I didn't know if Seer was dead. I didn't know where she was. So
Yeah.
like all that was a mystery to me, which was actually kind of cool as a writer
The
looking
faith
back
paid
on
off.
it. Yeah, the faith paid off.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and there were a few other times when Gideon was being tortured by Feyrna and Bintel later on that were tough to write because mostly because I like had to do research to figure out what is it like to, I've not been tortured like that. So what is it like to be tortured like that? What kinds of smells happen? What kinds of other things what kind of sensory things would be occurring? So that was just unpleasant to actually do the research for that and then write about that. But yeah, those are very different examples, but two examples that came in that moment that were pretty tough for me.
I'm assuming part of the storyline, like the end of book one, which is very much a cliffhanger, so much of the story leads up to it. So it was this very almost felt prophetic, the vision, and then what happens at the end. So I'm assuming that was kind of a mile marker that you knew you were going to hit.
Yeah, I did. I knew, I mean, the book is called Gideon's Dawn, and that was the one scene I knew was going to happen. I knew there would be a location that he was going to be at, which he's at. It's on the cover of the book. Like that's literally
Yeah.
that's Gideon's Dawn. He's on it. This is the moment after Tellus leaves, and he's looking across the Black Gorge at the Deathland Barrens. I knew that scene was going to occur, and I knew that was the moment he was going to find out who he was. But that's it. Like I knew that
Yeah.
scene, and so yes, that was a piece of it I had. And I think I had one or two other moments that I knew about, but that was the main one for sure.
Awesome. I have a question around some of the characters. So, a lot of them are developed pretty early on in book one. A lot of them are mainstays throughout the book, although some have different faiths,
Right.
as we'll say. Um, and there are a few more characters that are introduced in three and four, but for a large part, you kind of set up this foundation of the characters. I'm curious which ones were maybe the easiest to create, hardest to create, and then maybe the second follow-up question would be, which one did you fall in love with the most, and which ones were, if which ones would be the hardest to spend time with?
Right. Yeah. Um, well, it was really interesting challenge because this story takes an interesting tack on the idea of the protagonist because we start with Gideon. He's definitely our through line. However, through the course of the books, his role diminishes and it becomes more of an ensemble cast. And so I knew I had to do something that's actually pretty difficult to do in a fiction book because most of the time when you're reading a novel, you attach to the character that is sort of like he or she are your eyes and your ears in the story, and you don't really want to give that up. You tend to want to root for that character all the way through. But I needed for the reader to transfer over to any number of other people, whether it was Agile or Donovan or Abel, Kira, or any of the other characters that come up later on.
Probably.
So it did happen that as some of the later characters came on board, that I was intentionally changing point of views so that they were more prominent and Gideon was less prominent. Um, and as a result of that, I did fall in love with a lot of them, like, and some of them were more difficult to write. I think the Donovan was one that I initially was really found difficult to write. He's not like me, so it's a little harder for me to sort of relate to him. But then the more I got to know him, the more I fell in love with him. Toward the
Yeah.
end of the story, he's got to be one of my top, just one of my favorite characters, and his arc is just like
Oh,
amazing. Like there's a moment where he has this key victory that he defeats Yura, the Ranthan, and sometime I forget where that happens in book three, I think. Um, and he gets his eyes, which have been clouded all of his adult life, are they come back and they're blue. And I wept like a baby when
yeah.
I'm writing this because I was just so excited for him to have this moment of redemption that he had wanted all of his life, but had never thought he could ever have. So like he was one that I really enjoyed. I think one that I had trouble probably with, I would say is Stevron. And I think because
So curious.
he's a tragic figure, and in some ways, he mirrors Agile a lot. Because they're both orphaned in a lot of ways from their parents. They're both these kind of gifted people that are called to be great. Um, but Stevron has this insatiable need to be to win, to be liked, to sort of rise above or be better than. Like he just had this drive in him that was very egomaniacal. And that in his line of work, that was typically that was praised, to be like that. But underneath it, he just was a lost boy in search of a father and in search of a mother who actually cared about him. And he never got it. Like he just never got it. So it took a while for me to get past that initial, like he has a very unattractive veneer. You see it with Corintha. She sees right through him from the beginning. She can't stand the guy. And I'm like, you're right. I can't stand him either. But but then eventually could see through that just the immense hurt that he is dealing with, and his way of dealing with it is just to be bigger, more powerful, and stronger, and prove that he's got what it takes. And at the same time, desperately wants Corintha, as an example, to want to be proud of him or to admire him because he's just so lost.
Yep.
That was hard to to write in the sense that I was trying to figure out how do you show both the vulnerability of this character and his deep awfulness. Like he did some
Yeah.
truly horrendous things, and yet he's got this deep wounding that kind of fuels it all. So that was a tough one for me to do. But I think most of them were just I just found them all interesting. I also struggled a bit with Abel because because she struggles. She has such a strong sense of what's right and what's wrong, and um, the Pearl doesn't do things that she thinks are right. And so when the Pearl doesn't do what she thinks are right, she can't let it go. And she just uh, is not very okay with mystery. So she just wrestles with that all the way through the story. And that's honestly was is frustrating for her, which made it frustrating for me to write it. And poor Revel was just trying very because they spent a lot of time together in the books. He's trying so hard to just get her to like just trust him, and she's like, but he's not making sense. So like that was challenging for me at times too. But I found all of them to be just deeply human and enchanted me in their own ways. Each one of them enchanted me in their own ways as I got into their hearts and into their minds and into their perspectives. And I wanted all of them to succeed, even the ones that were on like Listeria or Balaam or any of the others that were part of the Council in Falinar. Um, I mean, I wanted them to try to find a way out, but um, only some of them did.
Yeah. Mm. Oh man. Well, it's the world, this world that you've created. I think I was dumbfounded because it is so immense and it's so layered and there's so much nuance and detail to it. I am not trying to overpraise you, but the Lord of the Rings and the Narnias would be proud of what you've created,
Thank you.
in my
Yeah.
opinion. Because I kept thinking to myself, like, wow, how much time and effort and energy. Like you were talking about being intrigued by the characters. I'm like, I can only imagine how much time you spent with each one to fully understand where every single character, which most of them are so deeply layered and multifaceted, to have written from so many different perspectives. Like, I mean, you must have just given so much of your time and yourself to developing not just the world, but even the depth and all these facets of the characters themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's just one advantage to taking 40 years. So I had some time.
Yeah.
Had some time to hang out, grab a coffee, with the various characters. But yeah, it's one of the interesting things that like when you read a lot of fantasy, and this is no diss on this approach, but many fantasy books that we read today, the characters are differentiated often by having a very distinct mannerism, or they have a distinct way of talking, or they have a distinct sort of physical trait, so that it's easy for the reader to pick them out. And I sort of I painted myself into a corner kind of intentionally with the initial characters that we meet because they're all part of the remnant, at least initially. And the remnant is a kind of like a tribe of people who've take almost, if you think of it like a Native American tribe, they have a certain culture, they have a certain way of talking, they have a certain cadence to their voice, and they all talk the same. And so one of the things that I was scared of, like when I first got into the writing, was are these characters going to all sound too much the same because they all sort of have the same cadence, the same way of talking, like how is the everyday reader going to be able to tell like that they're different? but the answer to that for me was, to your point, just hanging, trusting the reader to know that that's how people are. We all talk largely the same. There are characters out there, but a lot of us just talk pretty normally, and nevertheless, we're all very, very different. We all have different stories. We all have different sort of uh, root wounds and root skills and root brilliances, and all that's different. So just getting to know each one of the characters as deeply as I possibly could, and trusting that that would come out almost between the lines of what they would say or how they would say things. The fact that Abel, as an example, walks more stiffly than Agile does. But I never say that. You have to kind of almost pick up on it by the fact that she's just kind of more, her back is stiff. She's got this way about her. So like things like that, they were very subtle, but trusting the reader to pick up on those nuances that are there. So it is very gratifying to hear that you do see that and you do get that. You get that the characters are different and they have very different stories underneath their cultural veneer.
Yeah,
That's
so
separates.
different. They're all so different. I didn't even make the connection between Agile and Sevron, like because every character feels so uniquely different throughout the
Yeah.
entire story.
Yeah.
Um, you- I was talking about kind of the world and the layers and the depth and detail of what you created. One thing also is you created two different languages for this story. And I'm like so curious how, I mean, to me, it feels like such a feat to be able to create one, let alone two. Like, would you mind sharing a little bit about how you came to create that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Tolkien was an inspiration, but I knew I would never. He literally languages is his was his expertise, so I'm never going to approach that. But I did kind of take some cues from him about if you had a language whose intent was to physically impact the world, like to have physical impact on things. It was a language of power, essentially. What would be different about the structure of that language? How would it be formed that might be different from like English or Spanish or French or something like that? Um, because the purpose of our language is to communicate, and the purpose of that language is to do stuff. And so like what would be different? So I did just do some basic thinking about that and figured out, well, this language will probably be its sentence structure will be based on a different a different outcome. Like it's not to communicate a message, it's to accomplish a task. And so therefore it has this different structure. So I kind of just started there. And it has to get its power from somewhere. So thus come the words of invocation that start out in Delo. And so I first started with Delo and I just created like, here's the basic structure of it. And then where are the language, the earth languages that I wanted to kind of pull from. And so I drew some from Hebrew, some from Latin, some from Spanish, and some from Sanskrit and some other languages like that to kind of just give enough of a sense that it's familiar, but not like any one language you can point to, just so we could have a sense of what and I also wanted it to sound cool. So, so I threw that in there and gave it some rules as to like you would have in any language of how do you modify a verb or how do you add, how do you say also this or that too or these three or that kind of thing. So have all that in there. So just a basic structure. And then once I went into the story, as things needed to be said, I just sort of created the vocabulary as I went. Sometimes having to go back and research, like I said, those other languages to see how that word or that idea was conveyed in those languages, and then finding the closest sort of match to what I was creating in Delo. So Delo came first, and then Saleh is a corruption of Delo. So I really just had to kind of pull from the structure I already had because it's created by Avedon, and Avedon cannot he cannot create anything new, so he can only modify or corrupt what's already been made. So he takes Delo, he corrupts it and modifies it to his own purposes. So it has the same structure as Delo, but he uses different words and he invokes a different power source. Essentially, it's kind of a stolen system that he's using with Saleh, which is why it has no creative capacity, it only has the ability to destroy, whereas Delo can do both. So that's kind of how it began. And then little did I know as I got into the later books that, they get better at it. Like the especially the remnant learn the language better. They understand how to say it in more fluent ways. And so I had to also learn how to say things in more fluent ways. And that's stated some in the book. Yeah, in some cases, I didn't want to bore the reader with trying to read a bunch of foreign language stuff, but I did want enough of it in there so that if you could sound it out,
Yeah. I mean, it was
some
really central to the story.
yeah. And you could see how it does sound. You could hear how it does sound. Yeah, so that's kind of how that was made. And I really liked the idea of the magic system being just so deceptively simple because it's just a language. It's like if you learn this language, of course, learning the language is really hard. That's part of the problem. But if you learn the language, and you can pretty much just do whatever you say, but there are all these limits, and it comes across as a soft magic system on first glance, but it's actually a very hard magic system in the same way that precise, almost like precise scientific language is hard to do. So de lo is a precise scientific way of speaking in order to accomplish things. Therefore, it's a hard magic system.
Yeah.
Because you can say if you said something really loosey-goosey, then you could do all kinds of things you don't expect to do, including destroy yourself. So
Yeah.
yeah, but anyway, that's how that came about. Is just how to how would you create a language where words could kill or give life, and then what would that sound like, work like, be like? How would a society form around that? Who would have power? Who would have control over that language? How would commerce work in that space? Like all that stuff came out of that.
And I would imagine this is just a guess, but also a question. It feels like those that came into Delo had the right heart to steward it right or correctly. And then with Saleh, it was about the power and fame and, influence.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. You can't. I mean, there is a bonus. There is some bonus material available on the website for the magic system that explains that you cannot speak Delo unless because it's powered by the giver, is powered by the pearl, which are the pearl is the emissary of the giver. The giver is the god of this world. So you can't do anything that's out of alignment. You can't say anything that's out of alignment with the will of the giver. And so that is a limitation of Delo, but you can't learn the tongue unless your heart is aligned to the giver, unless you want to do the giver's will, more or less. You're kind of on the same side as the giver or the pearl, which is why you can't speak both languages. So, whereas Saleh is tied to essentially selfish ambition or self-preservation. So if you're looking to either advance or preserve yourself, and that's your main goal, much easier to access that, by the way, than it is the giver's will. But if that's your goal, then you can access Saleh. But that is obviously that will and the giver's will are not the same will. So you can't access both. And that's the great limitation of what separates the languages and also why Saleh is inherently self-destructive because once you buy into that, it becomes a self destructive process of just constantly trying to feed your own ego, feed your own glory, feed your own power, which we all know that's what eventually happens to anybody that follows that path. They end up eating themselves alive or destroying themselves in some way, and a lot of the people around them usually.
Yeah. Oh man, I love it. I love it. I mean, okay, so the story, I mean, the Pearlsong Refounding, the arc of the story itself, had so many highs and lows and just pivot points. And like, I remember just reading it as a reader personally, like what? Like, the like, oh my gosh, type moments, like, what the hell? And just really like being shocked by certain things. And it's part of what that made the story, the series great for me is you think things are good and then all of a sudden there's this turning point. And I'm curious for you. I know just in the conversations you and I have had where you have these moments that you were like, I'm like throw the book moments, I would
Yeah,
say.
right, right.
I'm curious if there were any that stood out for you that were those moments that you were just like, why is this character doing this? Or why is this happening in the story right now? That was like really standing out for you.
Yeah. There were several of those. There was one really big one, but I'll save that one for in a minute. But like I mentioned the facing. That was one of those where I was very frustrated, didn't know what was happening with that. There's a story of Balaam, like when at the end of book one, where Agile, I think it's Agile, who slams the book of Delo onto Balaam's back.
Yeah.
And that begins a process that I had no idea about. And so Balaam begins to go through this transformative journey where he's getting really sick and all this stuff is happening to him. And I did not understand what was going on with him. Um, and so I didn't, I was the oh God moment there, the kind of throw the book moment was when he shows up in Solidari Soundin not to attack anyone, but because he has essentially come to his senses and he's now wanting to follow the pearl. And and what happens to him in that moment is that he has to confront his adopted son Sevron, who is there to basically defeat the pearl. Um, and Balaam has to speak Saleh to fight Stevron, but Balaam has sworn Saleh off. So it's this awful moment for him because he's already said no. Think about Donovan, same story. He had to swear it off. He can't speak Saleh anymore because his heart has changed, but he doesn't know how to speak Delo yet. So he had to speak Saleh to fight Stevron, but because he was so weakened, he couldn't beat him. So he got killed like he was the almost like the first martyr in the book because he gets killed in that moment when he was at a point of redemption. That killed me. It was really hard to see that happen because he had gone through such a journey to get to that moment. Um, but I think the worst one for me was when I Gideon goes unconscious after that moment. He's unconscious all the way through the Deathland Barrens. They get to the Black Gorge. Gideon goes. They get plummeted into the gorge. They're underwater, and somehow the Pearl has made this sort of air bubble for them, and they're in this safe haven under the water. And that's when I realize Gideon's buried again. And this is not, and it's the first time I realized in the story that he keeps getting buried. He's buried and he's brought it back up. He keeps this death and resurrection. Death and resurrection is happening to Gideon a lot. I'm like, what is that about? And so then when he comes out and he wakes up, that's when I realize that he's probably going to die. And up until that point in the book, I did not think that Gideon was going to end the story as a martyr. I thought he was going to end the story coming out of it and maybe going back to Earth and having a story to tell. Um, but when I realized that, I think I realized it as Gideon realized it, that he was probably, that this what was going to be asked of him was he was going to die. And I even remembered at this point, way back in the first book, when he has the vision, he has this vision when he's in Providence, Colorado, and he has this dream, and this being appears to him and says, "You're going to go to this land that I'm going to show you, and you're going to die for me there." I actually wrote that
Wow, I totally didn't put that together.
in the first book, but I
Yeah.
didn't think that, I thought
Dang.
that was metaphorical. I didn't think that that meant Gideon was actually going to die. I just thought that meant I was like, oh yeah, he's probably going to have to, let some things go. But in this moment is when I realized he's just going to have to die. So
Man.
I had to put the book down for a couple of days at that point because I did not, I was like, I just don't want Gideon to have to die. He's gone through so much and this has been so hard and he's coming out of it now and I don't want to see this happen. So that was really tough. And then, of course, he had to go through the whole process of accepting it himself. Like that's not something he was commanded to do. He was like, you can choose. And so he did make the choice himself as a free man to do it. But then when it actually happened, um, and I didn't even know ahead of time that his staff would be the instrument of his death. I didn't know that until the scene happened. And so just that even happening was just a stab to my own heart. And so like
Yeah.
I had to put the book down at that point too. And just I remember I was in this field, I was out riding in this field and I just left the computer and went for a walk and wept. Um, and I did not go back to it for several hours because I was just so hit by that about the moment of his passing. But yeah, so I think those were a few of the key moments like that. That were
Yeah.
hard.
Oh man. And I mean, even as the reader, I experienced a lot of that emotion. And obviously they weren't even characters that I birthed, but like just experiencing it. Like I remember when Gideon returns to Simron, and I
Yeah,
remember bawling as he sees the couple, and I'm just like, oh man, you can feel what he's feeling to
yeah,
such a degree. And I one of the things I love in how you wrote the series is that um there are so many emotional, heartfelt, vulnerable moments. There are so many like angry moments. What's funny is like none of the story is remotely a comedy, but as you get to know these characters better, one of the things that I love that you do is you weave in just these comedic moments that are so poignant but so perfect. Because like you're crying with these characters, you're crying about their experiences, the hardships that they're going through, you're kind of riding the highs that they're on in the victories. But then just these little quips that you add in that I was just like dying laughing in the process of experiencing because they're so just like just so often put in, just kind of tucked in there.
yeah,
And you come across it and you're like, oh my gosh, that's hysterical.
yeah, yeah. I mean, part of that was because a few of Gideon in particular had a bit of a sarcastic bent to him, so that would come out a few
Totally.
times.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure, that was fun. Donovan had a few times when he was kind of funny, but yes, yeah, it was good to have those lighthearted moments, for sure. It was great to see like Captain Daria, she was a lot of fun. There were a few other characters like Bartimaeus Moss, like Amiel, who's the other one I mentioned. They were the three that I told you earlier. If I were to do like a little side story
Yeah.
on, it might be one of those three characters. And part of the reason is because they were some of the more lighthearted characters in the books. Or Captain Quigley is another one. He was pretty
Quigley, such
lighthearted.
a great
Yeah,
character. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, definitely. So anyway,
Okay. Yeah, those would be amazing, amazing spin-offs if you ever, I don't know whatever I can do to lobby you to write those spin-offs would be amazing.
I know
But
I have been reading lately about this other writer that I follow who's also been promoting the idea of writing little novellas or just side stories and like, well, yeah, that might I hadn't thought of it, but it's kind of an attractive idea
yeah.
because I wrote this whole series with some cliffhangers kind of built in, not big ones, but like little teasers with the idea that if the story really did take off and people really did love this world, that other people could pick up the story and write their own
Oh,
adventures, like
nice.
in this space. Because Sacravelis, like we literally are on one in one nation of this entire world. That's we spend the pretty much the entire time in. And it's an important nation. It has this really powerful role to play, but there's a whole lot of other world to explore there. Not to mention the gateways that we encounter at the
Yeah,
very end of the book, where Agile takes off for who knows where. So that's also a teaser for who
that's
knows what.
super cool. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize your intent behind that. That is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned, so much outside of that, but even Sacrivelis, I felt like there were certain lands that I would have loved to have camped out and learned more about, or actually, gone to and seen and really explored more.
Yes, me too. Yeah. So it may yet happen. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know, but we'll just have to see how it unfolds. But it's been, I think, wonderful to spend the amount of time I got to spend in the inherited lands, and to see kind of what this land is like and the peoples that live there, and then just see what unfolds there. Because we still have at least two other sentient races we haven't met yet, that are on this planet, and then there's a whole lot about the races we have met we don't yet know.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot to still explore. But yeah, the Zatanni, the Athromir, we don't know anything. We haven't even met them, by the time the story ends. So there's a lot more that can be explored there for sure, which I am excited about doing. I'm not sure what's next, but I'm excited about whatever it might be.
I love it. Well, I'm curious, kind of as we go through the story, we get to really like the bulk of kind of the head of the story in three and especially into four. I'm curious around like the logistic dungeon master timing of it all. Um, because I know one of the things you were curious about is the reader's experience of the Battle of Wordhaven, which everything kind of leads up to. And, I know you mentioned it, I think it was like 50 pages of that passage. And I'm curious what your heart and curiosity still is around that. I know you've heard a little bit of my kind of reaction and experience of it, but you were talking about Robert McKee and all these pieces and holding that intention, but also getting it to where you want to go. I think personally, in my opinion, is you did a great job of balancing that. And then, like I mentioned, my experience was it didn't feel like 50 pages at all. Like it felt like I'm so engrossed in the story. I'm so engrossed in what's happening. And I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, just like, oh, okay, all right. And it's almost this world that I'm experiencing it as it's happening. I'm curious how you kind of crafted that and, what, even now, how you hold that in curiosity of how the reader will experience it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like there's the 50 pages of the Battle for Wordhaven, and then the Battle at the Wall, the Battle of the Field, which is 100 pages, which is later in the big one, the bigger one. And in
Yeah.
both of those contexts, I was both kind of I was wanting two things to happen. One is I wanted the reader to experience the the weight of the battle, to like that sense of you can't just walk away from that. Like you can't just say, okay, I'm tired, or let's take it up again tomorrow. Like you have to be in this until it's finished. And so the on the one hand, I wanted that sense of it, man, it is one hit after another hit after another hit after another hit. And the time keeps going by, and nobody's sleeping and nobody's getting food. And it's like, where's the water? Like just all that's all happening. But at the same time, I didn't want the reader to have this almost like so draggy that you just start skipping pages. Because I've literally been in that space where I've been reading a book before and there's a battle going on. I'm like, okay, let's just figure out like I think they're gonna win, so let's just get to this place where they do, because I
Yeah.
don't really need to know all that stuff in the middle. So what I wanted to accomplish, especially with the second one, which is the big climactic battle at the end of book
Yeah.
four, I wanted for the progression of the battle to have its own micro narratives, to have its own sort of peaks and valleys, to have its own sort of interesting developments that happen and also moves around, on the battlefield
Totally.
so that you have this constant interest in what's happening there. And for me as a writer, it was exhausting because it is like I can imagine these directors who direct these big multi-million dollar budget movies, and they have like the A team and the B team and the C team and the D team, and there are all these different filming crews that are doing different things. And I'm like, that was me because I have an A team here with Agile and a B team over there with Donovan, and then Rebel's up in the side of the wall, and then there's Carintha who's up here, looking at everything. So how is all this playing out, and which point of view do we look at now, and where do the dragons come in, and how do they fly, and like all those kinds of things are the logistical questions of the battle and the human experience or the Ronthan experience of that battle, or the dragon experience of that battle. Like, how does that all occur? Or when the people come in and they start doing their thing, or when they start dealing with the Riftmen and how
Oh man.
suddenly they don't want to kill the Riftmen, and then what do you do with that? So there's all this stuff going on that also plays into the larger narrative of the battle, and then how does Donovan respond to that? So there's just so much interplay happening, um, and then keeping the magic system at play properly in the space so that Delo is not. I'm not breaking any rules for Delo in the process at the same time, or for Saleh at the same time, making sure that if they're doing something magical, that it makes sense that they're doing it, that it's not out of the rule book. It's not breaking any rules I've already set up, that kind of thing. So it was quite an ordeal to actually create. But I love how it seemed to work. You're one of my early reviewers to say it did. So I'm happy to say it
Oh,
hopefully
so
did.
beautifully. So beautifully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is good.
Yeah.
Um, It's cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to
Yeah.
just drill in, ask some questions, and help me celebrate the completion of this story. It's been great to talk about it. Um, I guess
So
did
one
you have?
question for
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Um, what would be your biggest hope that the reader gets out of the series?
It's interesting you ask because like I mentioned early on that I started this book without really knowing why I was writing it. uh, Early in like years ago, but now I'm very clear. Like I'm one of the things Robert McKee said in his brilliant training course, that 40 hours I sat under him, was he said that every great story asks a question and tries to answer it.
Mm,
The problem is you never actually know what the question is until the climax of the third act. And
wow.
so I got to essentially the book four climax of the third act, and when Gideon gives his life, and I knew like I knew before that, but I really knew then that the what I'm really hoping for the reader can be captured oddly enough, in this dedication I put at the very first part of Gideon's Dawn. So I can find it here. Oh, it's somewhere. Here we go. It says the following. It says, to all of us sojourners who have been, who have lost heart on the way to our dreams. So to all of us sojourners who have lost heart on the way to our dreams, have hope. It's never too late to be who you might have been. I think for me, that's Gideon's story, and that's the story of everyone in the book who is on an arc to try to answer the question, am I too far gone? Have I gone too far in this down this dark path, or am I too damaged, or did I blow it too many times to ever make it back to be someone that I thought I might could be? Um, and what I hope for readers is that when they read this book, that read these books, that they really get the reinforced message that the answer to that question is yes, you can absolutely come back from no matter how far you think you've fallen or how bad things have gone or how bad they may be now, that there is a way that leads to life and there is a way back to become who you thought at one time you could be. It's never too late for that turnaround to begin. And everything in this story is really about people who are facing that question and who in many cases make the courageous choice to say, I'm going to believe that it's possible. And we see what happens when they do. And there are a few cautionary tales as well, people who in the story who don't decide to go back or to believe that they can come back, and we see what happens to them. But I think generally it's a book about hope and a book about redemption and the possibility of coming back from darkness into light or from brokenness into wholeness. Um, that's what I hope for people.
Ah, I love it. I love it, Michael. Thank you for answering those, taking the time for answering those questions. If I could quickly even just affirm the art that you've created and now put out into the world, like this story was so meaningful for me. As I was reading, all the books have a different feel to them, in my opinion. But there were so many times where in the season I was in reading it, like it felt so encouraging or it felt so inspiring. And, I would like have a situation in front of me that felt dire or felt hopeless. And literally by reading the book, I felt like reinvigorated and just a hope was reignited in me that I was like, no, I can face this down. Or, not only was it a journey that I got to love and experience and a world that I got to adopt to your point as like my own and experiencing it, but it literally what you created literally helped just invigorate me and strengthen me in the things that I was facing. And so it was a direct correlation to being able to face down my own stuff, even in the midst of just loving the story itself. So
Mm.
I am so grateful for what you've written. I'm so grateful for the experience of reading through it and being able to just walk through that journey and how it even then mirrored into what I was walking out in my own life. I've loved it. My heart is that all these readers get to experience the life of it that I have. Being in my feels, also just feeling empowered and encouraged. Man, this is one of the greatest stories I've ever read, and I mean that sincerely. I'm not trying to give hyperbole, but I personally I love it, and I'm so excited for the world to read it as well.
Oh
So
man, thank you. Thank you so much. It's so good to be with you, and I appreciate so much the encouragement. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time.
absolutely. Last question.
Yeah.
So obviously the series the last two books are coming out. Where can they get the books?
Yeah. Well, you can find the books at my website, which is tprbooks.com, uh, or the pearlsongrefounding.com. Either one of those will get you there. And that will have links to Amazon where you can get any of the books. The last two are coming out on December 2nd. Probably by the time people see this, they'll already be out. So the links are there for print or for digital version. The audiobook version for the first two books is already available, and the audiobook version for the second two is in process. So they'll all be available eventually online. So that's where you'll find it.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you again. It's been great having this time and just being able to have the conversation around it, hearing your heart, and then this world that people are going to have this amazing opportunity to step into.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.